So let's do a quick review of where we are from last week before we start. So last week we were introduced to the animal soul. And we said, what's the purpose of the animal soul? The animal soul is a soul that God put in every living organism. What it's supposed to do, that attribute, it's supposed to take care of the organism. It's supposed to make sure that the organism remains alive. In other words, it put a nature into the soul, and the nature of the soul is to take care of me, to make sure I won't die. And by the way, that's the only nature of the soul. That's what we try to say. In other words, my nature of the soul doesn't care about you. It only cares about me. If it will care about you, it's only what you can do for me. So I'll be nice to you as long as I get something back. If I'm not going to get something back, there's no reason to be nice to you. And then we say, by Jews, that animal soul is guaranteed to have another qualities. It has a little bit of goodness in it also. In other words, it is a little bit altruistic. By non-Jews, on the other hand, it's not guaranteed. Some people would have it, some people would not have it. But by Jews, everybody will have it. That's where we ended last week, pretty much. In other words, yes?
The animal soul, its main function is to keep the body alive.
That's right.
But also pleasure, physical pleasure.
That is keeping the body alive.
But you don't need pleasure to be alive.
You need to procreate. You need to eat good. You need honor from the environment. The more people know you, the better you can be alive, and so on and so forth. That's what it cares about. Okay. So we said that every Jew has an animal soul. That's the animal soul we discussed last week. And today we're going to be discussing the godly soul. We are on the second chapter, Perek Bet. On the second chapter, chapter number 2. I think in some books it's page number 6. If you want to know the page number, it's in the bottom, page number 6. Middle of the page. So today we're going to start to discuss the godly soul. Again, Tanya is long. We're not going to get to all the details today, but we're just going to mention some of the things. V'nefesh hashenit beIsrael, and the second soul within the Jewish people, Hi chelek oloka mimal mamash. It is a part of God from above, literally. Before we continue, just like I said, if I would write this Tanya, I would start with what makes us a Jew. The things that makes us Jewish is the godly soul. So it's very strange that he calls it the second soul. You should call it the first soul. Go ahead.
Also, why is he using nefesh and not neshama?
Good. We're going to discuss that. A very good question. We're going to actually discuss it a little bit today. When it says the word nefesh, yeah, it means naran, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Nefesh is an all-inclusive word to 3 levels of the soul. We're going to see the soul in itself has 5 levels. It's called nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. In Kabbalah, it's called naran chai. Yeah, it's 5 levels of the soul. Nefesh is an all-inclusive word. So sometimes it says nefesh, it means the level of nefesh, which we're going to discuss what it is later on. Sometimes when we say nefesh, it means all. Nefesh, ruach, and neshama all combined together. But it's a discussion that we're going to have later on. So the question is, why does it call it the second soul? It is the main soul. It's what makes us Jewish. The fact that we have God's DNA in us, let's call it. So the nefesh hashenit b'Yisrael, the reason why he calls it the second soul It's because it gets infused into the body second. In other words, the godly soul, the time that it really gets infused into the body is when you're 13 years old for a boy and when you're 12 years old for a girl. Until then, it's not completely infused within your body. By the way, this is the reason why God doesn't punish you until you're 13 for a boy or 12 for a girl. The reason why God doesn't punish you, because it's not, you can come to God and says, what do you want from me? You didn't give me my entire soul yet. And now you complain that I sinned? After he gave you the entire soul, then he can come with complaints. I gave you everything you need and you didn't do it. Now I can complain. But until then, just by the way, just for our information, this is a side issue. The godly soul enters into the body in many stages. So there's a point of conception, like everybody knows. After that, there's a point of 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months of birth. That's a major one. It's a major one. Afterwards, for boys, it's circumcision. That's another very major one when the soul enters the body. Then it's 3 years old, but it completely enters the body when a person is 13 for a boy or 12 for a girl. So that's why it calls it the second soul, because it only gets in, we are only get completely introduced to it second. The first soul is there from the beginning. It knows what it wants from the beginning. Okay.
Yeah, but what soul made the other?
Very good question.
Before coming down?
Very good question. So, it says in chapter number Aleph, in the first chapter, we said that when the soul comes down, it takes an oath, be righteous and don't be evil. So he's asking which soul took the oath? Anybody wants to try? Just logically.
It's the second one.
Which is the second one?
The godly.
The godly. Okay, you're saying the godly. Anybody else? You're saying it was the animal soul. Why?
Because you have to, that's the whole struggle. Because the godly soul, it wants to do mitzvah. But the animal soul is like pulling you away.
So I won't give you the answer right, but right now, logically, it seems like he's correct. Right? Logically, that's what it logically makes sense. The godly soul doesn't need to take an oath. It wants to do the right thing anyway. The animal soul, it all the time wants to go against God. So it needs to take an oath to give him the strength to stand and do the right thing. That's logically correct. We might keep it, we might not, we'll see later on. But we think that way for right now. If it changes later on, we will get introduced with the...
So I have a question. So
Yeah.
at what point, when Adam HaRishon was created by Hashem, we say that Ruach Hashem was blown through his...
We'll see soon. We'll see soon. ונפש השנית בישראל, and the second soul by the Jews, היא חלק אלוקה ממעל ממש. It is a part of God from above, literally. How do we see that? כמו שכתוב, like it is written, ויפח באפיו נשמת חיים. It says about Adam, that God blew into him the breath of life, ve'ata nafachta bi, and like we say in the morning, and you blew it into me. וכמו שכתוב בזוהר, and like it is written in the Zohar, man denapach, from where did he blow? Mituch yenapach, from inside of him he blew. Let's explain what's going on over here. We all know how God created the world. How did God create the world? 10 מאמרות נברא העולם. With the 10 utterances, the world, God created the world. In other words, the world was created with 10 utterances. ויאמר השם יהי אור ויהי אור. And God says, let there be light, and there was light. And God said this, and there was this. And God said this. Look in Bereshis. And God said, and he wrote. In other words, the world is made out of God's speech. Speech. Like the famous word, when you create something from nothing, the magician, when he takes a rabbit out of the hat, he says before that, abracadabra. Abracadabra is Aramaic. Aleph means Hashem, the one. Bara, created. Kedibra, with speech. Hashem created with speech. Abracadabra means Hashem created with speech. In Aramaic. That's what it means. So it means, how did God, what kind of a trick did he do? Yeah, he created the world with his speech. You might, when you have asthma, have you ever, any of you have kids with asthma? No? No, but God, thank God. Yeah, so if you have asthma, some of the kids get exercises. And the exercise that asthmatic kids is that they have this machine and they have this ball inside the machine and they have to blow into it and to keep the ball constantly in a certain position. So you have to blow constantly and to keep the ball in the certain position. You will notice that after, 30 seconds, for sure 2 minutes, the kid is exhausted. He can't blow. Even if he can take a breath in between. He goes, when you blow, you become tired. And it's very, very strange. Why is it strange? Because when you can, if I tell you to speak, yeah, I can speak for hours. Yeah, I can sit over here now and speak for 6 hours, I won't become tired. I blow for 2 minutes and I'm exhausted. If you ever had, that's right, if you ever had a party and you blew up some balloons, remember some balloons to blow up? After the 5th balloon, you said to your wife, I can't do it anymore, too much. It's the same thing as talking. So over here, this is going to be the analogy. When God created the universe, he created it with speech. What does it mean, speech? Speech is something that came out of God, but it is not part of God. That's how the Zohar will explain it. We're going to see it later on. It is not a part of God. It's a creation which takes place outside of God. I'm going like outside like this, because there's no such thing as outside of God. But this is the creation. The creation that the world was created in 10 utterances that was outside of God. And this is how the world was created. Just 1 second. When it came to Adam, it doesn't say that Hashem created Adam. It says, how was Adam created? Not like the animals, not like the fish, not like the bird, not like anything else. Hashem took mud, made a dummy with mud, and then what did Hashem do? He blew into it a breath of life. What's the difference between blowing and between speaking? So we said when you speak, it's not you. You don't have it doesn't take away from you. It's not part of you who is going into the thing. But when you blow, why do you become tired? Because a part of you transfers over to the object you're blowing to. So it says, what is Adam? First man, what is Adam? Adam, Hashem, how did he make him? He blew into him. In other words, he took some power of godliness and he imbued it within Adam. And he put it within Adam. So this is how Adam received a part of God. Yes?
Now, Hashem created the universe and the world through speech.
That's right.
Would it be out of line to think that maybe we as people create our own little worlds with our speech, with what we say?
Exactly. It's not out of line at all.
Okay.
Not out of line at all. Okay? So this is the way the second soul that God blew into Adam is a part of God. שפתוחיות ופנימיות החיות שבאדם מוציא בנפיחתו בכוח. Just like a person, when he blows, he transfers his own life force into the thing. So did God transfer his own life force into Adam.
So Adam got clearly a nefesh Elohit because it was straight.
That's right. So we're going to have a question, but we should not.
Adam was not Jewish.
Well, we're going to have a question which we're not going to discuss right now. If so, Adam should be the first Jew. And we know that Adam won't. I'll just address it very, very quickly. Adam had a godly soul, and it hovered around him, but it wasn't imbued within his DNA. He didn't put it into his DNA. The first person to imbue it into his DNA was Abraham. So there were other people who had a godly soul before Abraham. Abraham was the first one that had a contract with God to put it into his body, into his DNA. Not our time, not right time, another time, another place.
So Ishmael has it too. and so
Ishmael doesn't, because how do we know that Ishmael doesn't? Interesting question. What Abraham thought. If I have it, Ishmael also has it. And he had a conversation with Sarah, his wife, about it. And the conversation with Sarah, his wife, was like this. Sarah, his wife, saw that Ishmael was going off the way. So she told Abraham, this kid, Ishmael, throw him out of your house. So Abraham says, he's my continuation. He is my son. That's what Abraham told Sarah. And Sarah says, no, only Yitzchak is your son. And Abraham disagreed with her. He says, no, Ishmael is also my son. And there was a big disagreement. God had to intervene. God came to Abraham. It says, everything that Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. And then he tells him why. Does anybody remember the words why? He says 3 words. Maybe 4. Ki be'itzchak ikara lecha zera. He says, because Sarah is right. Ishmael is not your continuation. Because Yitzchak will be your continuation. So some saying, so if Yitzchak should be the continuation, Esav should be part of the Jewish nation also. And we know that Esav left. So if you look at the verse very carefully, it doesn't say, Ki Yitzchak ikara lecha zera. When God tells to Abraham, it doesn't say Yitzchak will be called, it will be your continuation, will be your offspring. It says, in Yitzchak you will find an offspring. Only part of Yitzchak and not all of him. So even though Yaakov, ki be Yitzchak, ki be, not ki Yitzchak ikara lecha zera, ki be, in Yitzchak you will find an offspring. Somewhere within, only half of Yitzchak will be. Esav will not. And this is the agreement that God had with Abraham from the beginning. It says that's the idea of the Jewish nation. Okay? So it's true that it should be with Adam, but Abraham was the first one to imbue it within his body, some other times, another place. So, כך על דרך משל, this is, as an analogy, נשמות ישראל עלו במחשבה. This is how the Jewish people are not part of creation. The godly soul, that every Jew has, is not part of creation, but they came up in God's thought. They're within God's DNA, let's call it. You know, I'm going to, as a rabbi, surprise many of you over here, but I'll tell you that the Christians were right. Some things they were right in. One of the things that they were right is that Jesus is the Son of God. The reason why he's the Son of God, it says it right here on Tanya. Every Jew is the Son of God. He's got God's DNA. Yeah? This is why it says it right over here. Israel alu machshava. We came up in God's thought. Where does it say that we came up in God's thought? Kedechtiv, like it is written, Bni Bechori Israel, that the Jewish people are the firstborn of God. And it says, Banim atem la Hashem Elokechem itim, you are the sons of God. It says, what do you mean we are the sons of God? It sounds ridiculous to say that a human being can be the son of God. So he explains exactly what I'm saying. Pirush, this is the explanation. כמו שהבן נמשך ממוח האב. We got over here some doctors, so they might have some questions about it, but we're talking about over here Kabbalistically. By the way, it's also physiologically, but I don't want to get into the physiological, but we're talking about a Kabbalistic idea over here. I'll explain about it. First I'll read it and then explain it. Just like the son is drawn from the head of the father. Let's explain, what does it mean when I say the son is drawn from the head of the father? If you take the seminal fluid of a person, the seed of a person, that seed has all the qualities of the father. That seed has all the qualities of the brain of the father. It has the potential to think, to emote, to have more other seeds, to procreate. Everything is included within that seed. It started, in other words, it is the father's essence. The father's brain essence became physical and became seminal. It became a seed. His intellect, his emotions, who the father is, became a seed. That's what it is. So just like the son is drawn from the brain of the father, כך כביכול, this is נשמת כל איש ישראל, the godly soul of every Jew, נמשכה ממחשבתו וחוכמתו יתברך. It is drawn down from God's thinking and God's intellect. Now, before we introduce the poem, I'm just going to read it. דאיהו חכים ולא בחוכמה ידיעה. He is wise, but not wise like us. אלא הוא וחוכמתו אחד. But him and his wisdom are one. וכמו שכתב הרמב"ם, just like the Rambam writes. Okay, I'm going to now introduce a problematic things within Judaism that many Kabbalistic people have talked about. When you say that God and his intellect are one, is it true or is it not true? So the Rambam says that God and his intellect are one. So if we came from God's intellect, we came from God. Because God and his intellect are completely unified. There's no distinction between them. The Maharal, probably heard about him, Maharal Miprag, immediately comes, not only him, other Mekubalim, come and immediately said, nonsense, cannot be. God is not intellect. There's millions of levels above intellect that God can be. In other words, God, how can you say that God is intellect? Intellect to God is like action to us. It's not he's not one with his intellect. God is completely pure. There's no intellect. But the Rambam says God is an intellect and are one, and the Maharal and other Mekubalim disagree. So we'll have to, when the Rambam says that since we came from God's intellect, and God and his intellect are one, we have to solve the problem, because in Judaism, just by the way, forget Mekubalim. Logic dictates that God is above intellect. Yeah, intellect is just one of the powers. It's not God himself. It's not his essence. Yeah, you don't have to go there. So let's look. If you see there's a Haggah. There's a Haggah. Haggah means you have a question over here that Kabbalistically, like we had the previous chapter, Kabbalistically, if you learn Kabbalah, you'll be bothered by this information when the Rambam says that God is united with his intellect. So he's going to bring, he knows that you're bothered, he's going to address your botherment. So let's read the Haggah. The Haggah says, Vehodu lo, and you'll be surprised, the Alter Rebbe says, that everybody admitted to the Rambam Chachmei Kabbalah, even the Mekubalim, even the people in Kabbalah admitted, you know what, Rambam, you're right. Even though we have a question, God is above intellect, but what you say that God is an intellect that's right, we agree that you're right. It says, which Mekubalim? So you probably heard about the Ramak who live in Tzfat, or the Arizal who lived in Tzfat also, very famous Mekubalim. כמו שכתב בפרדס מהרמק, it says, look at what the Ramak writes in this Pardes. He has the same question. He says, God is above intellect. But he says, you know what? Even though God is above intellect, the Rambam is right. וגם לפי קבלת האריזל. And not only according to the Ramak. Even the Arizal, which the Arizal talks about levels which are much higher. He admits that the Rambam is right. That God as an intellect is one. Yetzivta milta. It says it's a strong... This logic stands בסוד התלבשות אור אין סוף ברוך הוא. This is the way the godly light gets dressed down. How? על ידי צמצומים רבים בכלים דחב"ד דאצילוס. It says, if you notice, there's going to be 5 worlds which we're going to be introduced to soon. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Sia, all this word. Yeah? Abiyah it's called. So the Atzilut. So that everything is, in other words, God is one with intellect. Where is God one with intellect? God is one with intellect in the world of Atzilus, in the highest world. In the first world, let's call it, that comes out of God. That you can say God is one with intellect. Above that, you can't say it. In other words, now it becomes problematic. What's the problem over here? It looks like we're going to the realm of Christianity again. This is why it's important. People say, do not learn Kabbalah before the age of 40 without a teacher, because if you do, you're going to go wrong. So let's just try to understand what's going on. How can you say that God is above intellect and God is with intellect at the same breath? We don't have 2 gods. We only have one God. You're saying there's 2 gods over here. One is above intellect, one is below intellect. So let's try to imagine what's going on over here. Just to give an analogy. Think about King David. King David, the most intellectual King David that you can think. The King David who wrote the Psalms. An intellectual, a genius. Beyond all geniuses. Right? He's throwing a party tomorrow. Whatever the party needs to be. Because he decided he needs to throw a party. And he needs the tablecloth. And he wants the tablecloth to be beige. Right? Do you think that King David, the man, cares about what color the tablecloth should be? Does it affect him? He's an intellectual person. He couldn't care less what color the tablecloth should be. It's not King David. If you ask King David, when he's contemplating godliness, King David, what color do you want the tablecloth? He says, leave me alone. What do you want from me? You think I care about what stupid color I want a tablecloth? But for some kind of reason, King David decided that he wants a beige tablecloth. And the next day he comes into the hall and he sees that the servant specifically didn't put a beige and he put a green tablecloth. And this King David that doesn't care about anything except God, all of a sudden becomes angry. He says, but I told you. I told you to put what? To put a beige tablecloth. Why did you put green? How does it work? Do we have 2 King Davids over here? Do we have one King David that doesn't care about tablecloth and another King David that does care about tablecloth? So the answer is no. King David, in his essence, doesn't care what the color of the tablecloth is. But from time to time, he decides to come down into the level of the world. When he decides, when he chooses, when he chooses to come down to the level of the world, he chooses to be affected by the world. It's his choice. He chooses that the world will affect him. Since he's God, God also has such a choice. God, it's a famous question. Does God really care how you're going to behave? Well, God doesn't care how you're going to behave. Does he care if you shech the animal from the neck or from the back? Or if it's a cow or if it's a pig? It doesn't make a difference for God. Yeah? Your commandments that you do doesn't make a difference for God. It doesn't affect God. So if it doesn't affect God, how do we find in the Torah that says God became angry or God was happy that we did a certain thing? So the thing is, God chose to be affected by our mitzvahs. God chose to care about it. So the same thing over here. When God chose to have a creation, then he became one with intellect. So it's true that he's one with intellect, but that's not who God is to himself. God is to himself, doesn't care about intellect. He's above intellect. Okay, let's continue. אך לא למעלה מאצילוס, but God is to himself above אצילוס. וכמו שכתוב במקום אחר, like it's written in another place, I'm just going to read it quickly because it's a Kabbalistic idea, שאין סוף ברוך הוא, that the godly light, מרומם ומתנשא רוממות אין קץ למעלה ממהות בחינת חב"ד, that God to himself is much higher than intellect, עד שמהות ובחינת חב"ד נחשבת כעשיית גופנית אצלו, until the intellect by God is completely physical. Like it's a famous phrase by God, כולם בחוכמה עשית. The entire world in chokhmah you did. You acted. In other words, for God, the level of chokhmah is just like for us, the level of action. It's the lowest level by God. It's not even a level. Okay. So in the end, what are we taking from it? That we do come from God's intellect. Because God chose to be with his intellect. He doesn't have to be with his intellect, but he chose to be one with his intellect. It's a choice. And since God chose to be one with an intellect, and the godly soul came from that level, the godly soul is made out of God. Because God and his intellect are one. Okay. Now we're going to have a question. The analogy doesn't make sense. And I'll tell you why the analogy doesn't make sense. Because see, me and my intellect are not one. What do you mean God and his intellect are one? I and my intellect are not one. I'm not my intellect. I'm not the information. I'm not the ability to think. I am who I am, and the intellect is a power that I acquire. It's a power that I have. It's not who I am. In other words, you can take the intellect away from me, you still have me. The intellect and me are not one. Maybe it's very close to me. It's the closest thing that I can be to myself. But it's not me. I think, therefore I am. Everybody knows that? Yeah? I think, therefore I am. It's very close to me, but it's not me. A person who, God forbid, is a vegetable is not a person. He doesn't think. Or when you were a baby in your mother's womb, in the beginning, before the brain, started, you were not a baby. You were a baby. You were human. You still have an essence without intellect. So in other words, me and my knowledge is for sure not me, by the way. Yeah, the knowledge that I acquired is for sure not me. It's something outside of me that I put, that I know. But it says, it doesn't work like this with God, you see. We acquire in intellect and in knowledge things that are outside of us. God, there's nothing which is outside of God. The intellect and the knowledge and everything is all within this unit called God. This is what he's going to say like this. Shehu hamada, God is the knowledge, Vehu hayodea, and he's the one who knows the knowledge. In other words, the knowledge and the knower are one. But me, the knowledge that I know and me are not one. For example, if I die tomorrow, or not me, somebody else dies tomorrow, yeah? If somebody else dies tomorrow, 2 plus, even though he understands that 2 plus 2 equals to 4, if he dies, yeah, if the person dies, 2 plus 2 still equals to 4, because the knowledge is not him. But if so-called God dies tomorrow, the whole concept of 2 plus 2 doesn't exist. There is no 2 plus 2. The whole things of physics, the whole things, the reason why 2 plus 2 equals to 4 dies with him. In other words, all the information and God are one thing. ודבר זה, if you want to think about it, to learn about it, there's levels to understand this. But you should know that in the end you're going to get stuck. Your brains will not be able to understand it. We're almost 4 lines from the bottom of page 6. אין ביכולת האדם להבינו על בוריו. You will not be able to understand it well in your brain. Why? כדכתיב, like it is written, החקר אלוקה תמצא. It says, do you want to investigate godliness? וכתיב, כי לא מחשבותיי מחשבותיכם. And it's also written that my thoughts are not like your thoughts. In other words, you will never be able to understand that kind of physicality. I can explain to you some level of it, but after a while, even the greatest Mekubal will just have to say, okay, I've reached this understanding. From now on, I have to say, God works in mysterious ways. I don't understand that physics. The physics of godliness is different than the way my human brain can comprehend. Okay. So now we discussed, by the way, somebody has the time, just that I know where we are.
7:39.
Okay. So now that we discussed this, that we say that every Jew has a godly soul, that it is God's DNA, immediately each and every one of us should have a question. Does anybody can think about a question that comes because of this fact?
Can you repeat the question?
Because every Jew, whether he's a low life, whether he's Moshe Rabbeinu, every Jew, his godly soul comes from God's DNA. Yeah? From God's thought, just like a child of God. That requires a question that we all should ask.
Why do we have sin?
Very good. So if everybody is a child of God, everybody should act like a child of God. That's the question. And you know what? Maybe some people do act like childs of God. Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Akiva, King Solomon. Maybe there's some great men that do act like childs of God. But most people, I see levels. There's many levels of people. You remember chapter Aleph? There's 5 kinds of people. There's a tzaddik, there's a rasha, there's a beinoni. How all of them? You want to tell me that all of these Jews, the tzaddik, the rasha, and the beinoni, all of them are sons of God? If they are, if you're right, they should act like the son of God. If you put an apple seed in the ground, you're going to get an apple tree. Maybe a big apple tree, a small apple tree. Yeah? If you put God's seed in the ground, you should get godliness out. And over here, what do we happen? We don't see that everybody is godliness. Every Jew should be like God. Every big Jew should be like Moses. And we don't see that this is happening. So this is his next question. ואף שיש רבבות מיני חלוקי מדרגות, and you're going to see, he says, you look down in the world and you see all these kind of different levels of people. There's tzaddikim, there's reshaim, there's beinenim. Tens of thousands of levels. No one is the same as his friend. You have hundreds of thousands of levels. מיני חלוקי מדרגות בנשמות. You've got thousands of levels of souls. If it's an apple tree, it's an apple tree. If the children of the same person all have his qualities. Over here, we don't seem to all have godly qualities. And we see that people are גבוה על גבוה לאין קץ. Some of them are higher than us, infinitely higher. כמו גודל, just like the bigness of מעלת נשמות האבות. Compare our souls to the souls of the forefathers, which is completely not comprehensible, ומשה רבנו, and the souls of Moshe, על נשמות דורותינו אלו דעיקווה דמשיחא, on the souls of our generations that are called the hills of Mashiach. Okay? We're going to stop over here in the question. Again, the question is like this, that we stopped in. We just got introduced and we were told that the second soul that every Jew has is a part of God. And when it comes to say it's a part of God, it says, don't think that we are just saying it, a part of God. No. We literally mean it. It is God's DNA. Because God and his intellect are one. Yeah? Just like a son is part of his father's intellect, we are part of God's intellect, of whoever God is. And you're going to ask a question, it's not God, it's his intellect. God and his intellect are one. Look, all the Mekubalim agree with the Rambam. Don't worry about it some other time. That's what he says. So if that's true, we should all be in the image of God. We should all be in the image of God. And unfortunately, we look around in the world and we see there's tens of thousands. Everybody's different. This guy is different than this guy, that guy is different than that guy is different than that guy. Each and every one of us is different. Each and every one of us has advantages and disadvantages. It's up and down. But for sure, we cannot compare ourselves to Moshe Rabbeinu. And even within the same generation, one person is different than another person. We're all different. So the question that we remained so far is, how is it possible that all of us came from the same source and we don't look the same? We don't have the same appearance. We don't have, not just the same appearance, we don't look like we're in the same species. We look like it's different species. Some people are giants, or some people are, let's call them angels, and some people are worms. That's the difference between them. Some people act like animals and some people act like humans. Yeah, different levels. And you say that everybody comes from the same soul. How does it work? Now we're going to field some questions.
So if a father has many children,
That's right.
they're not all going to be the same.
They're all humans.
Some will be gifted, some might be slower. some
Excellent.
might have
But they're all what? They're all humans.
Yes.
Over here, when you see the levels of the soul of Abraham and me, for example, he's not the same species as I am. He's a completely different level. Abraham is an angel compared to me. The level of the soul. I'll give you an example. Abraham wakes up in the morning and the only thing that he's able to think about is God. He can't think about somebody else. Even on the day that he was told to go kill his son, you know how he woke up in the morning? Ha! What a good day today. You know why? Because I'm going to do God's commandment. What's the God's commandment? Kill my son. You want to tell me that this is the same thing as me? No, it's not the same animal. It's not the same species. It's not the same being. We're different beings completely. In other words, don't think that level between me and Abraham is not, I have more in common with a monkey than I have with Abraham. I understand a monkey. A monkey wants to eat. A monkey wants to procreate. I want to eat. I want to procreate. I'm much closer to a monkey than I am to Abraham. Abraham doesn't care about the things. He cares about godliness. He was told to kill his son. He did it happily.
He's closer to the source and we're further away? Is that part of
But we're all sons. How is it possible? That's the question. Yeah.
I think it has to do with
Excellent. Excellent. So some people are going to try to say what Jacob said. They're going to say because some people are fighting against an animal soul which is very, very strong. But then you're going to find out that tzaddikim have an animal soul which is rougher than ours. So that theory is not going to work. God gives them an animal soul which has more desires than our animal soul, because otherwise it's not fair. They don't have a battle. He has to give free choice. In order to have true free choice, he has to give them free choice. So as good as your godly soul is, as desirous your animal soul is going to be on the other hand. It says, Zek is neged zeh. It's always remember, it's like the twins, Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov is the godly soul, Esav is the animal soul. He's going to give, doesn't matter what kind of good godly soul you have, the animal soul of that person is going to be a little bit stronger. Just like Esav is stronger than Yaakov. That's the idea is going to be. So it's a good thinking, but it doesn't work in our case. It's not going to work. They also have, for example, how do we know this? Just to give you an example. We have great sages like Rish Lakish, who was a highway robber. He used to kill people for a living. And he became one of the greatest sages in the Jewish people. Before that, the guy was Meyer Lenski. You know, he had Vegas. This is what he was thinking about. And all of a sudden, he became, Moshe Rabbeinu.
Didn't I even say once, Rabbi, that righteous men or people are predetermined, or they're
I don't know. We had a thing from the beginning. What we didn't learn yet, we don't say it.
I mean, they're born that way, is what I heard you say once.
There is such a concept which we're going to learn later on. Yeah, we said about, if you remember, we said when we discussed about King David, that King David refined himself, but usually people cannot refine themselves. That's why God puts the righteous people in each and every generation. But even forget the righteous people. Again, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about someone that lived in our generation. There was a chassid that wasn't a tzaddik. We know he wasn't a tzaddik. There was a chassid, he wasn't a tzaddik. Lived in Russia, 1900s. That the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, sent him over here to America to raise money for the yeshivas in Russia. And he came to America, and then he went back to Russia. So all the Hasidim in Russia heard about America. You can imagine Russia. Somebody comes from America in the 1920s. They want to hear, what is America for you? What do you think about America? So this was his description of America. Now you're going to see, Jeff, that me and him, us and him are not on the same level. When they ask him, what is America like? He says, it's a very strange place. So they asked him, why is it a strange place? You see, he says, because they take butter and they take bread and they put butter on the bread and they eat it together. That's why it's strange. Now you would think to yourself, well, what's so strange? You take butter, you take bread and you eat it. What's so strange? So I'll tell you, he lived such a life that food is not for taste. Food is to make a person healthy in order that he can serve God. So if he needed butter, what would he do? He ate butter. If he needed bread, what would he do? He ate bread. But to be so grob, to be so unrefined, to actually put butter on bread, that in his psyche was something like, it's like for us, a guy only eating ice cream all day long. You don't do such a thing. So you want to tell me, he lived such a life. He never put, you can imagine a person who doesn't care what he eats. Imagine, all our life is about food and enjoyment and this and that. He didn't understand people who put margarine or butter on bread. And he's talking about somebody who lived in our lifetime. And you want to tell me that my godly soul and his godly soul are the same thing? No, we're completely different levels, yeah.
I think when we said that the intellect of Hashem comes from Hatzilut,
That's the highest level.
so I'm thinking perhaps when Hashem incorporates our godly soul, it's in different levels. It's not at one level like we may think. It could be a different type, at different levels of godliness, like in Hamim, in Gvura.
Excellent. So I'm going to address. See, all these questions that you guys are saying right now, all these answers, he's going to say them. Everything that you guys said, especially this one, and he's going to say no, because you know what's God's intellect? We have it. You can actually see it right here now. The Torah. God's intellect is the way God thinks. In other words, its essence, his intellect. Is God and the Torah one? Really one?
Yes.
So God and the Torah is one. So God is an intellect are really one. It's not just a level. It's who he is. God, the intellect is God's DNA. That's what he's saying. And this is why the Ramak and the Arizal agreed with the Rambam. Because you're going to see exactly your question. You were trying to say, like he's going to try to say also, you know what, but maybe God is above it. Is above his intellect. It's even higher. So he says, no, the intellect of God is the Torah. And God is one with the Torah. God is one with his intellect. We really come from God's DNA, which is the Torah, which we're going to address this on chapter 5. Yeah, we're going to address your question. But it's nice, very nice try, because he's going to do the same thing. Yeah? But as long as everybody understands the question.